Hello and welcome to this video on preserving cherry blossoms, or in theory any flower with the right adjustments to our method. Pickling is not new, in fact it is one of the oldest methods of preserving. Unfortunately, or fortunately, its height in popularity was the 1800s, whereafter canning became the preservation method of choice. Despite this decline in favoritism, pickling does remain not just valid, but preferred in some roles and ways. Cherry blossoms being just one example. The reason you might wish to pickle cherry blossoms, among other flowers, is that they don't last for very long. The Japanese cherry blossom in particular is especially short-lived, with individual flowers only surviving a week or so, while the whole tree may gradually flower over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, and then it's gone forever, well, for that year anyway. Assuming we're talking about more broader cherry blossoms and not just Japanese cherry blossoms, the preserved flower we're going to make is entirely edible, and in fact, in theory, any flower should be edible. However, you may wish to, let's say, use them in different ways, particularly as the common application for cherry blossoms is as a flavouring ingredient in something like onigiri or rice balls, given the unusual texture and taste for particularly first-time consumers. The process is somewhat straightforward, at its simplest, but there are steps you can change to make things better, but also to an extent more complicated. First, you will need to pick the flowers. Take only the flower, as leaves will later leach chlorophyll and turn everything a brownish-green colour, which, despite what flower you have, will not look particularly appealing. Next, wash and drain the flowers carefully. This is because the flower is very delicate and will fall to bits very easily, so caution is warranted. Next, sprinkle salt over them and wait. Much like you would with, say, something like kimchi and the cabbage that you use, it's similar. You sprinkle salt on it so that it leaches out the water. The next day, you need to gently squeeze them to extract this brine solution, or at least as much as possible, without overly damaging the flower itself. Now you put them in vinegar, and this should leave you with your cherry flowers or cherry blossoms preserved for a long time. For the changes we suggest, the first is to dry them differently, in fact very differently. We suggest drying your cherry blossom flowers in salt directly. This might seem odd, but it is far safer for keeping the flowers whole and as aesthetically appealing as possible. Further to that, the salt can be reused without issue, mostly because all you're doing with this is drying them out or acting as a desiccant. And because this acts like a desiccant, it will dry the flower out not just quickly, but evenly, and that's perhaps more important. What you will have this way is a flower that has the same flower shape without the need for squishing or crushing it, as you would to extract the brine. And because of this, the flower is completely dry throughout and looks exactly right. If you want to use this on, say, baked biscuits, if you want to use it as decoration or similar, this is perhaps the better approach. Not only do we find it a good method for that reason, but you can effectively bury an entire bunch of flowers together this way, and they all dry at the same time, same rate, and to the same degree. It's especially good if you're trying to dry a large number of flowers at once, since you will also forego the need to individually pluck each blossom at first. That's a process that is prone to the frustration of cherry blossoms falling to pieces in your hands as you pluck them from the branch. We've learnt that one the hard way. And next is the vinegar process. You could just use white or rice wine vinegar. These aren't necessarily hard to get, and they will work. Rice wine vinegar is somewhat more aromatic and flavoured, and white vinegar tends to be, well, it smells just like vinegar. It's acetic acid diluted down to about 4%. Both of these options will both preserve the flower, and to an extent you will lose colour. Now this is the problem with it. If you're using more colourful cherry blossoms, the more common varieties in Japan, this is an issue. If it's a white cherry blossom, it doesn't really matter because they're white. You're not losing any colour in that case. If you are looking to preserve the colour in your blossoms or other flowers as much as possible, a vinegar with a colour that's in it naturally is a good choice. Or if you are forced to, you can always add food dye. if you're operating more with, say, traditional Japanese cherry blossoms, you can use something like plum wine vinegar, or just plum wine, because this is a purple-reddish colour, and therefore it's good for not just protecting, but likely to a certain extent imparting or dyeing a certain amount of the colour into the cherry blossom itself, therefore ensuring that there's flavour, there's appearance, and there's aroma. You could also try preserving them in basically pure alcohol instead, rather than vinegar. This can be good if you want to make, say, sake flavoured with cherry blossoms, or create a sort of essential oil or extracted flavour using vodka, something similar to what rose water is. When you're going to use these, there's particular applications, and to be blunt about it, you want to really use them for sweet or savoury dishes. Think of light snacks, that sort of thing. Now, the two things to be aware of here, first of all, the flavour that you're going to have in terms of the flower flavour is actually quite light, mostly because you have quite severely dried and therefore the volatile aromatics are simply not very volatile for now. The second to that is that there is a very obvious salt flavour, so you need to be mindful of this, and it's why mostly sweet or savoury dishes are the intended application. Sweet because it will counter that saltiness, and savoury because, well, salt is part of that savoury flavouring profile. You can, if you need to, soak them in water to try and extract some of that flavour, or salt if you so wish, and then dry them with paper towel, but it's generally not needed. You can also use them either as part of tea making, where it's something called sakurayu, or you can use it as decoration in the tea, although that's probably some sort of sacrilege, in cultural terms at least, or just more generally similar to, say, candied violets or other flowers that are used for baked goods like cakes. You can even on top of that use it as a more, let's say, a cultural or subjective decoration for things like onigiri or sushi. To be clear, pickled cherry blossoms are not a generic taste. They are somewhat of an acquired flavour, similar to how rosewater isn't a very appealing aroma and taste to some, and to some people it tastes much like you're trying to consume soap. It doesn't mean the appeal isn't there, just that there might be a very niche receptive connoisseur, where the result would be otherwise a rather violent and repulsive reaction. Of course, then again, they look quite pretty, so if you're only going to use them as, say, cake decoration, there's no reason not to, apart from the fact that they're, well, somewhat difficult to get a hold of at times. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.